Hi everybody, welcome to week 5 of Criminal Justice 201 Policing. I'm Professor Jason Ostro, and this week's lesson is Patrol and Investigations. Let's get started. This week we're going to discuss 3 traditional cornerstones of policing, describe various patrol innovations, discuss the difference between real life and TV-based investigative work, much different, explore various alternatives to traditional retroactive investigations, discuss proactive investigative techniques, and then review the issue of entrapment in policing. Let's get started. 3 types of patrol methods. Okay, so in policing, they have what's called the traditional model of police work. Traditional model of police work. And then it's made up of 3 different things, which they call the 3 cornerstones. The first is what they refer to as random routine patrol. You could see I underline the word random there because that's a word that's used commonly in policing and by police scholars and the general public, but it's something best to be avoided because in truth there really is no such thing as routine in policing. Anything can happen at any time, so just be mindful of that anytime you see the word routine. The second part of that cornerstone is rapid response to 911 calls, handled by vehicles and individuals on foot posts, like you see in the picture there at the bottom. And then finally, the third part is retroactive investigations, and those are typically handled by detectives and investigators, right? So those are the 3 cornerstones of the traditional police model or traditional police work. So first, random routine patrol, right? Some places they have 1 officer vehicles, other places they have 2. There are pluses and minuses for each. A lot of that depends on the jurisdiction. Large municipalities like New York, Chicago, LA, typically they'll have 2-person vehicles. Smaller places, they might have 1. There's always the safety versus efficiency issue there. It costs more money to have 2 cops in a car than does to have 1. But there's also always this human element of personality conflicts and other issues you have to deal with when you have 2 cops in a car too. One of the issues with vehicle patrol, just especially in the last 20, 30 years, has been this perspective or this perception that officers are too far removed from the community. They just respond to emergencies and then they leave, and then they never really deal with the underlying problem. It deals with the idea of like community policing and problem-oriented policing. So there's been this movement to move people out of vehicles and onto foot posts, onto sort of more mobile vehicle patrol or bicycle patrol or foot patrol, things like that. Get them out of the cars as much as possible. Really popular during the community policing era. So the second part of this is rapid response to 911 calls, and this really started with the advancement of technology in the 1960s of communication technology in the 911 system, where police became a very, what we could say, crisis-driven, response-driven sort of orientation and profession. There's a problem. Somebody calls 911, the police respond, they deal with it, then they go on to the next one, then the next one, then the next one. Very, very sort of response-driven, right? In common police speak, they call that being a slave to the radio because it's like 911 call after 911 call after call after call after call. You just bouncing from one place to the next, especially in busy commands. If you work in big cities throughout the United States, you'll find that most of your day is gobbled up just responding to 911 calls. So sometimes it's even hundreds and hundreds of calls a month. It's very, very busy in some places. So the purpose of this traditional model of policing is to have high visibility, that police officers should be out there, they should be readily identifiable, watchman style, order maintenance, omnipresence, right? They should be seen all over the place or as much as possible. And many people say, I've always wanted to be a detective, I don't want to be a cop. The truth of the matter is, unless you're like the 0.001%, then you will, in all likelihood, start your career as a police officer, on patrol. That's part of the job, right? And so almost all police officers start their careers in this type of assignment. Enforcement of law, deterrence of crime, emergency services, keeping the peace, investigating accidents, maintaining order, serving the public. That's what you're doing. You're out there and you're providing 24-hour a day, 7-day a week emergency service to the general public. Okay, so the other part of this is the retroactive investigation part of the traditional model, right? And you can see in the photo there that looks like an investigator is conducting a crime scene investigation of some sort. Retroactive investigations. Retroactive means it happened in the past, right? So like the event happened in the past. Typically, something is considered in progress in policing if it happens within 5 minutes, right? So there's a shooting that happened 5 minutes ago. It's in progress, right? The robbery in progress. If it happened like more than 5 minutes ago, it's generally viewed as the past. So retroactive meaning it's in the past, right? Okay, so retroactive investigations. Now this is important to know too. Patrol officers respond to the scene of an incident or an emergency, and they're the ones that generally conduct the preliminary investigation, which is probably the most important part of the investigation. And most people, wouldn't think this, but it's because the officers who first arrive on the scene, what they see, what they observe, the notes they take, the information they get, the canvass that they do, the video footage, the people's names and telephone numbers and contact information, their notes, that is used by the detectives in order to conduct a follow-up investigation. And if a police officer shows up at a crime scene and begins to conduct a preliminary investigation and walks all over the place and drops things and doesn't take notes and lets witnesses run away without getting their information, that's lost. It's never to be found. So the preliminary investigation is really the most important part of the investigation because everything that follows stems from that. So that's done by patrol officers. And then detectives and/or investigators respond to the scene, sometimes right then and there, and other times maybe a day later, a couple of hours later, and they conduct a follow-up investigation. All right, so different types of patrol methods. This is moving away from the three different aspects of traditional model policing that are used. One is you have foot posts, right? You have police officers out on foot, walking the beat, bringing back the beat cop. Police departments largely abandoned this in the 1940s and then started picking up again in the 1970s. The reason that it sort of died out for a while was because of vehicles just took over. And it was police could get to emergencies quicker on vehicle than they could on foot, and so this really fell out of disfavor. It started in the 1970s, but it didn't really start until the late 90s and early 2000s when crime started going down and community members really wanted more visible police presence and there to be a better relationship between the police and the community. It's kind of like community policing idea. So the idea is that a cop on foot is much more approachable than a police officer at a vehicle, and the vehicle creates this barrier between the officer and the civilian or the community member. Whereas if you see a cop walking through the park and he just says hello to people as he walks by, you're more likely to go and say talk to the person. He or she is more likely to talk to you. You can develop a rapport, a relationship. So it's a major part of modern policing, community policing. So patrol innovations, we have this movement, especially with technology, away from this sort of, although we still have some elements of the traditional model and these classic patrol techniques, we have this movement away, and leveraging technology, and they call this evidence-based policing, using scientific research on policing to implement best practices and crime fighting strategies. Things such as predictive policing, where they use sophisticated computer algorithms, weather, time of year, location, things of that nature, where they can sort of predict where crime will occur. Also, hotspots policing. You see that throughout the city. When you see a police tower with an officer up there, it's generally because that's considered a hotspot. Maybe there was a shooting or there were drug sales or something like that. Using technology and camera systems, right? On the back of those vehicles, police vehicles, you see are what are called license plate readers, and they read license plates and they go into centralized databases. And this is using technology to monitor and track crime and individuals. Directed patrol, especially vertical patrol in public housing units, very controversial stuff. And LPRs, as I mentioned before. So moving away from patrol and then into the investigations aspect of policing, when we think about like patrol investigations, they're sort of two sides of the same coin. Again, let's go back to the preliminary investigation, and that is the first officer on the scene, all right, the patrol officer. It's important that they preserve the crime scene, get names and contact information, canvass the area, make any kind of documentation, and make proper notifications. So a lot of people who say, I'd love to be a detective, but I don't want to be a cop. Well, what I can tell you is you really can't be, you have to be a police officer before you're a detective, because the detective is a police officer. But, uh, you know, nuance aside, um, police officers in uniform conduct preliminary investigations, and that's the first part of the investigation. So that's detective work that you're doing. So they must make detailed records in their memo books. Now they do things, a lot of police departments do things computerized on their phones. Complaint reports, they must, take detailed notes. They call that NIATWI, when, where, who, what. You can see right there, what, why, how, when. I'm sorry, how, why. And they have to maintain everything that's called Rosario material, any evidence that can be used by the prosecutor or the defense is considered. The police have to protect that Rosario material. A cop goes to a crime scene and conducts a preliminary investigation. They scratch a bunch of notes on a coffee cup because that's all they have with them. Then that's evidence, right? That's evidence. So everything the police go to, you have to conduct an investigation. Whether or not you're a detective or investigator is irrelevant. The police function is to do that, right? The preliminary investigation. All right, and this leads into what's called the idea of the detective mystique. And the reason that many people say, oh, I love TV shows and Law and Order and CSI and all that stuff, and all those shows are great. And they're always about detective work, right? But we have to think about the differences between the reality and the Hollywood version of policing. And these TV shows and movies feed into this detective mystique, which is like detective work is glamorous and detectives get to order other cops around. They have a higher status than uniform. And as we know from a few weeks ago, right, the police management organization, that many police departments, detectives have no authority over anybody. They're the same rank as a police officer. So what you see in a TV show or a movie where like detective says, "Hey, Lieutenant, get your guys out of my crime scene," right? That is probably not going to happen in the real world because, for example, in the NYPD, that would be like a detective telling not just their boss, but their boss's boss, "Hey, get out of here." That's just not realistic, right? It makes for good TV and movies, but it's not real. Anyway, so the idea that it has a higher status than uniformed assignment, more prestige, the work is exciting, heroic, TV, movies. These all feed into the idea of the detective mystique. And I'm not making an argument that some of this perception is not grounded in some reality. But again, this is a bit of a mystique more than it is in actuality. All right, so what do detectives actually do? In terms of investigations, they have to maintain case files, complete follow-up reports, canvasses, which is person to person, door to door, interview witnesses, re-interview witnesses. Right? This is why the preliminary investigation is so important, because if the officers first in the scene didn't get any of this information, now the detectives are on a fishing expedition. They have to reach out to contacts, maybe the district attorney's office or the detective bureaus, do interrogations, right? Questioning, prepare the case, confer with the prosecutor, and make arrests. So, those, and a lot of it is administrative work. A lot of it's administrative work, making phone calls, typing reports, entering information, follow-up work. Okay. So now we have these what they call alternatives to traditional investigations because of increase in technology and sophistication of law enforcement, case management systems, which traditionally investigations were case files, like literally paper files, right? Typewritten copies of things. Now things are computerized. Case management, they do crime analysis, which you'll see a few videos on that. They task forces. They work with maybe like NYPD, Detective Bureau. We might work with like the Joint Terrorist Task Force or FBI or Secret Service or State Police Task Force. So they have like these multi-agency task forces. Real-time crime, right? There's a video that's in your Blackboard for this week. Take a look at that. Facial recognition, that's something you see on TV also. It's becoming something that detectives use to identify individuals with all the cameras that are everywhere. Using specialized technology in criminalistics, right? Internet registries like sex offender monitoring, right? When people are convicted of certain types of sex offenses, they have to register as sex offenders with the police, and their information is publicly available. They're using video surveillance, drones, right? Now you have drones, and law enforcement. Some law enforcement agencies have access to that technology. How do they use it? How do they use it within the confines of the Constitution? Blending in plain clothes, right? You have officers who maybe are dressed down, they're dressed in civilian clothing, and then there's undercover. Though blending plain clothes and undercover are not the same. So blending in plain clothes mean essentially police officers who are dressed in civilian clothing who are out doing police work. And here in New York City over the last few months they've moved away from that, anti-crime stuff. But it still does exist. But undercover is much different. Undercover are officers who have no identity as a police officer. It might be embedded in some kind of, maybe drug gang or protest group or any other number of things. And those things do exist. No police identity, but they're actually police officers. They're often recruited right out, when they enter the academy and are given whole new identities. So if you see a cop who's wearing a New York Yankees jersey and is standing by the subway watching people jump, go through the turnstile or something like that, that's not undercover. That's that would be like blending plain clothes type of operation. Okay, undercover would mean they have no police identity whatsoever. Okay, and using these types of alternatives brings up what I would call the liberty versus security issue, which is not unique to me. It's as old as this country, right? Those who would sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither. Allegedly, that was said by Benjamin Franklin, and plus I'm paraphrasing. But liberty versus security is something we as a society have to always grapple with, like how much freedom can we have, but also collective security. And a post 9/11 world, this is really something that we've been grappling with, like surveillance and entrapment and all these other things, all these other issues. Like, what's more important, to be secure or be free? And how do you balance those? How do you guarantee people's rights, but also guarantee their safety? And the police are always, working this balancing act in the United States. So entrapment is one such way that this comes up, right? Entrapment is this inducing an individual to violate a criminal statute he or she did not contemplate violating. I don't need to read to you, but you can read it there yourself. It's a defense to criminal responsibility. It's based off of this idea of inducement, like police encouragement plays upon somebody who would not have otherwise committed an act, or tricks them into committing a crime. There's a legal standard from a case, U.S. Supreme Court case, Jacobson v. U.S. 1992. You might want to take a look at that. I'll just give you a couple of examples of entrapment, and we'll take it from there. Two examples right here. Example one. In an effort to stop robberies and grand larcenies, robbery is when you take something by force. Grand larceny is when you take something over a certain value or take something off of somebody. A plainclothes police officer acts intoxicated and barely conscious. Plainclothes, right? Not undercover. So plainclothes officer acts as if they are intoxicated and half conscious. They got expensive jewelry around their necklace. Somebody walks over to them, they look at them, they look left, they look right, they grab the jewelry and they run, right? Were they entrapped? Right? Were they entrapped? Let's look at the second one. In an effort to stop neighborhood drug sales, an undercover police officer offers to sell passerby drugs. So maybe there's drug sales in a neighborhood, and an undercover police officer walks over to people in the neighborhood and says, "Hey, do you want to buy these drugs?" All right. So what's the difference between these two? In my mind, and the way that I've constructed these two examples, is that the first scenario, the thought of the crime the inducement of the crime came from the individual, not from the police. Just because somebody's sitting there intoxicated doesn't mean you could run over to them and take their stuff and run away. It doesn't give you permission or authority to do that, right? So the crime came from the person who ripped the robber, the mugger, right? That would not be entrapment. The second scenario would be, and the second scenario would be, even if it's a drug-prone location, there's people walking around who are looking for drugs. If I'm just walking down the street and somebody walks over to me and says, "Hey, you want some? Can I sell you some drugs?" Right? Like, sure. Well, I mean, where did the thought of the crime come from? Did it come from me walking down the street, or did it come from the government? So this would be entrapment because it's coming from the government. Plainclothes police or undercover officer offers. Okay. So entrapment can be a little complicated, but something you want to take a look at also. Take a look at that U.S. Supreme Court case. All right. So for your assignments this week, got a couple of different things. Quiz number 1 is due before end of day on Tuesday, so you have 2 days to get it done. If you don't recall, it's 3 questions. They're a short essay, and you have an hour and 15 minutes to get that completed. It's weeks 1 through 4 based off of that material. This lesson also has 3 videos, short videos attached to it inside Blackboard, and watch all 3 because it's you're going to need it for that liberty versus security discussion board assignment for the week. And one of them is on anti-crime, which I think you'll find pretty interesting. The other one is on what's called the Real-Time Crime Center. This is outside of New York City. And then one is on the Crime Lab. So students tend to really enjoy these. So I hope you do and view all of them. Anyway, so the discussion board assignment is based off of material from this week as well as these videos. Complete your discussion board assignment as usual before Thursday. Responses are due before Sunday. I wish you all the very best of luck this week, and I'll see you online.